Hello and welcome to There's No Business Like, a podcast where friends and industry colleagues explore topics and interview leaders in our industry of professional theatrical touring.
Welcome back to There's No Business Like. I'm Josh Benson from the Marion Cultural and Civic Center in Marion, Illinois, and I'm here with my friends, Kevin
Maynard, coming at you from Tallahassee.
Katie.
Hi, everyone. Katie Miller with Michigan Maven Creative Associates.
Danielle and Brian couldn't be with us for this recording, but this week we're talking about the interview from last week with James Shapiro. I found the interview with James phenomenally informative. I never even knew about the Federal Theater Project prior to this, and an amplitude of arts funding within the United States. But also the interesting thing about it is that even then, theater was being used for positive social movement by creating awareness of housing conditions and creating awareness of social issues through playwriting and through the works that they're doing on stage across the country.
Yeah, I was pretty fascinated by that because I, like you, Josh, I did not know it existed. I also, we sort of talk about this all the time about the economic impact of the arts. And like, that's literally what they were using it for, was to put people back to work and to create an economic driver, which I thought was really great. The newspaper stories that you touched on, I thought were really fascinating. And I would love to see that, in 2034, 2035, somebody revive that to give like an homage to that for its 100-year anniversary, because I would love to see something like that on stage. Maybe not, the fire that happens at the beginning and the end, but maybe it's probably much safer to do that now than how they were doing it then.
And then we'll have to call it TikTok stories instead of newspapers.
Yeah, it'll just be like 60 seconds, but
Yeah, I was so grateful that James took time out of his very busy schedule to sit down with me and really delve into this chapter of American history. I knew a little bit about it from some research I had done in college on 1970s political theater and sort of connections even backwards in history, but I didn't know the in-depth story surrounding this. And I think you can hear in my conversation with him some of the things that really did shock me and felt so connected to our current moment. I think what was one of the most interesting things for me was sort of how the theater project, while it had its issues, it certainly does have its issues. And while integrated, still had problems with racism and some other things, but really truly was trying to be as inclusive as possible. And I think we talked a lot about how the different regional theaters were able to put their own spins on things. They were able to make the material relevant and meaningful to the people that they were performing for. And that is sort of the embodiment in a way of what we try and do today when we talk about making theater for all or arts for all and creating space for everyone and making work that is relevant and inspiring and thoughtful and tells the story of all the people in our communities. So I really felt so connected to that piece of the Federal Theater Project and that part of the story. This story just had so much resonance for me and shocking moments as I went and read through the book. Like when I said that I was gasping and exclaiming out loud as I was reading it, like I legit was. And the book is completely marked up and I have so many sections underlined, and I was, reading gigantic quotes into my notes app so I didn't forget them and I knew exactly where they were, because it just felt, this is the whole point, it just felt like it was ripped from the headlines from not only the last few weeks, but from, I would say, the last 10 years. A few weeks ago when we did talk about sort of what was happening with executive orders and the NEA and whatever, we talked about a playbook. I hadn't even discovered this book at that point in time, but we talked about understanding history and understanding what our predecessors had gone through. And this is a huge piece of that. So I really hope that everyone enjoyed the conversation, learned something from it, and is now thinking critically about understanding the tactics of the past and how they're being applied today and how we can be strategic in our own tactics moving forward.
I think that's a great transition into let's talk about how it looks today, what the current landscape looks like as far as government involvement in the arts. I think the initial biggest thing that has happened that's never happened before is that the Kennedy Center, which has always been a bipartisan entity, changed that landscape for the first time with the Trump administration clearing out some of the Democratic board members and putting Republican board members in to make it a partisan board, and then having himself appointed as chairman of the board for the Kennedy Center. For me, this was a gut punch. I've never been to the Kennedy Center. I've never paid that much attention to what's happening at the Kennedy Center other than knowing some of the things that they're commissioning, some of the art that's being developed there. But it still, for me, stood as the largest entity partially funded by the government that is working to create new work, commission new work, and showcase things within this country.
Yeah, it was definitely one of the most surprising revelations. Just seeing I don't even want to call it an announcement, but just seeing the tweet that went out that basically said he's making himself the head of or the chairman of the Kennedy Center, because it seems so surreal. I mean, it's, we've always seen a little bit of government interaction into arts and culture, just with, how the arts are funded, or like, sort of what are those grant guidelines are and things like that. But this just seemed like an overreach, a big step, and a big deviation from what we've seen in the past. And what actually is the impact of the Kennedy Center? What does that change on our national landscape? Like, who's really looking at what they're programming? How many folks that aren't living in the DC area are going into the Kennedy Center? But it is, really our closest thing to a national theater, and really our closest thing to what arts and culture gets sort of exported to other countries that's not movies and music. So yeah, it was incredibly surprising for me. And I hope that we see a reversal of that, and that this doesn't become the norm of just having whoever is in office be the head of that, or whichever party is in office be the head of that, because I don't necessarily want to have just one side of the story told. Like, I want it both there, but like, it needs to be bipartisan.
Well, and one of the statements that was made upon the change of administration there was that they are going to stop with so much woke programming. That's not word for word, but that is pretty close. And one of the things that blew my mind was the president was directly questioned, what performances that you've seen there in the last few years were you offended by? And his response was that he's never seen anything at the Kennedy Center. And so it really makes you question whether it's really about what was programmed there before or not, or if this was a means of taking control of artistic development and taking control of what is happening and what is being produced in our country.
In my opinion, Josh, that's exactly what it is. I don't think that the administration really understands, knows, or cares what the Kennedy Center actually does. They are looking at the symbolism of a drastic overreach and changing what is considered a political norm. So, I mean, we're seeing a chilling effect already on free speech in many different spaces, not only performing arts spaces, but in journalism, in education, higher education, in other spaces. That, in my opinion, is the intent of this. They don't actually care what's on the stages. They don't actually care if people come and see things there or not. They are just trying to create a culture war and scare people into not challenging what is happening through one of the most powerful ways we can challenge the status quo, which is art, which is conversation, which is inspiring people to action. They don't really care what's on the stage. It's totally a front for just trying to create a culture war of right versus left and supposed wrong versus supposed right.
On March 8th, the Kennedy Center released a listing of all of the shows canceled in the last 6 months and a reason for what of those shows were canceled. I believe that they did this as a means of getting their side of the story out with some of these cancellations. A lot of cancellations have happened because whenever everything changed administration-wise and it became a partisan entity, that a lot of people said, I want nothing to do with that. The most visible and public recently was the cancellation of Hamilton for the 2026 season. I'm going to go through that list just really quickly. There were 2 shows that were canceled prior to February. Everything else has been canceled since the administration change. Sheer Madness was canceled, but it was canceled due to theater repairs and not due to anything within the landscape. I don't know how to say this, but the letters are NMER. and it was canceled by the artist. Megan Gailey, canceled due to low ticket sales by the artist. R&B Love Songs Editions, canceled by the producer. Additional runs of Sheer Madness, canceled for low ticket sales. Balloon, canceled by the artist. Eureka Day, canceled by the producer due to financial reasons. Riot, scheduled for March 6th, canceled due to artist availability. An Evening with Issa Rae, canceled by the artist. Blacks in Wax, canceled by the artist. Low Cut Connie, canceled by the artist. Peter Wolf, a book launch, canceled by the artist. Samhat, one show canceled due to low ticket sales. Skipper the Seal, another book launch, is canceled by the artist. Arts and Wellbeing Panel, canceled by the artist. Amanda Room, canceled by the artist. Bard and the Beat 2, canceled by the artist. Saigon Nights, canceled by the artist. Bring Them Home, canceled by the artist. National Youth Poet Laureate Commemoration, canceled by the artist. National Symphony Orchestra, A Peacock Among Pigeons, scheduled for May 20th, canceled for financial reasons. Maria João Perez, I said that wrong, I'm positive, postponed to the following season. Bluey, postponed to the following season. Hamilton, canceled by producer. The majority of these things were canceled by the artists or by the producers as a reaction to what has happened. So there was an official statement by Hamilton whenever they canceled their show at the Kennedy Center. Political disagreement and debate are vital expressions of democracy. These basic concepts of freedom are at the very heart of Hamilton. However, some institutions are sacred and should be protected from politics. Kennedy Center is one such institution. The Kennedy Center was founded over 50 years ago with a sincere bipartisan spirit. Indeed, it was founded during the administration of President Dwight Eisenhower, named after President John F. Kennedy, and opened in 1971 under the administration of Richard M. Nixon. Kennedy Center was meant to be for all Americans, a place where we could all come together in celebration of the arts. Politics have never affected presentation of thousands of shows and display of extraordinary visual arts. However, in recent weeks, we have seen, sadly, decades of Kennedy Center neutrality be destroyed. The recent purge by the Trump administration of both professional staff and performing arts events at or originally produced by the Kennedy Center flies in the face of everything this National Cultural Center represents. The spirit of nonpartisanship ended on February 7th, 2025, with the firing of Kennedy Center President Deborah Rutter, the chairman of the board David Rubenstein, and numerous other Kennedy Center board members, and the cancellation of important programming. The actions bring a new spirit of partisanship to the national treasure that is the Kennedy Center. Given these recent actions, our show simply cannot, in good conscience, participate and be a part of the new culture that is being imposed on the Kennedy Center. Therefore, we've canceled the third engagement of Hamilton at the Kennedy Center, originally scheduled for March 3rd to April 26, 2026. There is more to that statement. To me, that statement encapsulates the idea that the Kennedy Center was for all of us, and it is no longer for all of us. And in that means that Hamilton can no longer be performed in a place that is not for all.
Well, I agree with that statement, and I do like the words that they chose, and I think they chose them very accurately. I do wonder what the implications of the impact are of all of these artists canceling. Obviously you sort of have to vote with your dollars, and you have to, vote with, for artists, that's their time and potential ticket sales and guarantees and that sort of stuff. But I really do wonder if, now is the time to make sure those things are on those stages, to make sure that people have access to that, especially on a national spotlight like that, or a national moment. I mean, the reality is that Hamilton obviously is a big deal, but it's been touring and it's been out for how long now? But I am curious, what's the implications? And, could it be better served by going through with some of these things so that people have an opportunity to hear those stories, see those people, hear those voices?
Kevin, I'm in the same boat as you. I totally agree with the statement as well, and I feel similarly, but I also wonder about artists still performing and standing up sort of against and letting the art be seen. I don't want to tell an artist what to do. I never want to do that. I want them to perform where they feel comfortable, where they feel safe, where they feel welcome. And in spaces that align with their values. Lucky Diaz and the Family Jam Band is a family music group. They're bilingual. They sing in both Spanish and English. They've won a ton of Grammy Awards. They're scheduled to play at the Kennedy Center on March 15th. And I just saw on their Instagram yesterday, they posted that they're going through with their performance because they feel it's important to still bring joy and honor their commitment to the families that they're going to be performing for on Saturday. And so I see both sides of this coin. As long as the artist feels comfortable and wants to be in the space and perform for the people they care about, I will support them in that. If they don't feel comfortable and they don't want to perform, I support them in that too. I don't think in all of this, any performing arts space, any artistic company, an agent, whomever the entity is, should follow what they feel is best. And I don't think that we should criticize or demonize any individual's actions because you have to do what ultimately is best for you. But I think there is value in thinking about still performing and standing up and saying, hell yeah, we're a bilingual family music ensemble. We're going to go play there. We're going to show them what it means to be art for all.
That's a great summation. That's yeah, I think that's exactly how I feel, is that like, obviously, like, I don't want to force performers to perform in spaces that, you know, that don't align with their values or that they don't feel safe in. But I just wonder, like, is now the time? If I was in their position, I wonder what my choice would be as well.
I was talking to an artist who's commissioned for a new piece that is premiering at the Kennedy Center in April, and they were really torn. And they were also getting pressure from donors and funders to cancel. But their mindset really is that there are multiple forms of protest. And one of those forms of protest is still standing up and performing and being exactly who you are in the space as long as you are able to. And that is the approach that they're taking. They are moving forward with that commission. They are moving forward with the pieces, and they are going to be present and stand up and be there.
And if they're going to be there, as long as the work is not censored in any way and they can be true to their art and their authentic artistic selves, and they feel good about that decision, then they should do it.
And there are also a number of artists who have not canceled their events at the Kennedy Center, but have worn T-shirts or have said things in protest from the stage. And they're actually using the stage and their platform at the Kennedy Center as a means of protest.
Yeah, I recently was talking with an agent about an artist, and you know, during this conversation, we were just talking about, you know, what our audience is like and what is the state of things in the state of Florida. And you know, she got around to saying, she's like, you know, because the artist we're talking about, they're like, he's trans, and it's like, I just want to make sure that the artist is going to be safe while he's in your community. I was like, totally understand. But the agent said something that I thought was really valuable. And they said that sometimes it's just important to see those folks on stage and thriving, even if they're not up there, like talking about their like using this as a platform. Like they're just in front of people and people just get to see them as humans and thriving. And I thought that was a really interesting statement.
And I think there's a lot of symbolism in that, Kevin. There's symbolism, there's representation, there is power in that. And I think a lot of sort of the underpinnings of this conversation is about power and about symbolism and about how it can be used for or against a cause. And so we talked about a little bit earlier, you know, this move on the Kennedy Center, I think is largely symbolic, and I think is largely, you know, supposed to intimidate people. And I don't want our colleagues across the country to change their programming, particularly if they don't really receive federal funds, to be intimidated into changing their programming. I want them to stick to their organizational values, to continue to meet the needs of their community, and not be frightened into censoring themselves or rethinking the way that they're presenting work that is more necessary than ever. And I know that's a tall order, and I know that is really hard to wrap your brain around, but what's happening in DC, where you keep talking about trickle-down effects in communities across the country, this doesn't necessarily have to be one of those.
So speaking of how it trickles down and how it affects us across the country, let's dive a little bit into changes in NEA funding for the next year and what that's going to look like, from what we can tell as far as what's out there right now. The first thing that was announced as an overall cancellation was the Challenge America grant. There are statements out there that had been in the works to be phased out anyway, and it had been under discussion for years. And so it just seems as though, especially with the political climate and everything about DEI and canceling anything and everything DEI, that seems politically charged and motivated.
Yeah, Marianne Carter, the former chairperson of the NEA, spoke at some arts advocacy events in Washington, D.C. last week. And I spoke to a few people who were present there. And the summation of that is she spoke to that, Josh, and what you're saying, that this was already under consideration to streamline operations at the NEA and make it less stressful for staff, essentially. And it's seemingly poor timing that these things sort of happen simultaneously. And then with the America 250 theme for a different grant program, that has been under discussion and consideration and in process of being launched since 2020. And so it seems, again, and there's a lot of different reporting and journalism, and we don't have any sort of direct statements from the NEA on this, except for what Marianne said last week. This was already in process. It was going to happen, but I suspect that the tenor and the guidelines around that have changed with the new administration. I don't know that the same guidelines and insistence on sort of the patriotic elements that are now being sort of demanded of that programming were necessarily planned before the start of 2025.
It's worth pointing out a few things is that, there's a lot of information that's flooding out surrounding the NEA and surrounding this grant process. And so one thing that is important is for folks to still apply for that grant, because a couple things is that the guidelines don't dictate that it has to be America 250, like that it has to have that central approach. The other thing is that really is, the other aspect is that's coming into question and is really being challenged in the courts are the DEI approaches, and sort of the big thing being that, the funding can't be used for diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. There is some information that sort of dictates that if your organization has those programs that you cannot get that funding. That is being challenged. And so we don't know if that's going to hold weight or not. So even if you think that you might not be able to get that funding, like you should still apply so you don't miss those grant deadlines.
If a lot of organizations don't apply and it seems that there's not a demand for the funds will no longer be there. They will no longer be present. And so apply, even if you think that there's no way that you're going to get it based on what is in your bylaws and your statements and in everything that is public forward, apply anyway. It's much better to have a chance at getting funded than to not take that chance at all. Additionally, the arts funding has been used for social change for a long, long time.
I would argue any funding.
Any funding. That is correct. But arts funding, which is the world that I've been witnessing it in, I mean, it has been used, in my opinion, in a fabulous way to promote diversity and equity for the last 10, 15 years. It seems that funding for social change is just moving in a different direction now. So it's nothing new that arts funding and requirements for arts funding are being used for social change. It's just no longer in a way that I like.
Yeah, Josh, I think that is a valid point and something for us to think about. I know this can sometimes be an unpopular opinion, but the reality is that when organizations are looking at grant dollars, they are looking at a way that their organization can fit into those guidelines. And when guidelines change with an organization that from a grantor that they have been getting funds from consistently, no organization takes a step back and say, well, this money is no longer there for me. What they do is they go, okay, how do I reword this? How do I rework this to be able to get that funding? What new language do I need to start using? Or how do I change my programming? I'm not saying that people should change their programming. I'm saying that, look at the language and look at what you're doing for those things, because this is what people do for grants all the time, not just in arts and culture, but across the board. You talk to any grant writer who is doing this on a large and consistent level, It's about fitting your narrative into their guidelines.
Additionally, if you were worried that a statement about DEI on your website is going to hinder you from getting the grant, speak with your actions, speak with your programming. You don't have to just speak with a statement on your website. The Marion Cultural and Civic Center, we've never had a statement on our website about DEI, about diversity, but we live it out through the way that we program for this community.
Yeah, I think now is just a good time to remind people that, like Katie was saying earlier, lean into your mission, lean into your values, do what you believe is right, and, continue to do that, because it's probably more important now than it ever has been, at least in the times that we've been programming in.
And there are communities of arts organizations that are coming together and having important conversations. And so if you are seeking more information, you're seeking community or seeking space for action, reach out to your state arts consortium or regional arts organization, and you can get connected with others that are looking to be in the same space as you are.
Yeah, I think now is a good time to lean into our presenting, or like to organizations like AFTA and APAP and the NEA, and like just all those things to find out like what they can do to help. It's not about just getting involved with your state entities, but like your state lobbying entities, like the Illinois Arts Council in the state of Illinois has the Illinois Arts Alliance, Florida Culture and Arts here. Like, it's the lobbying arm.
I think also it's really important to find community right now. So if you are looking to get involved in any sort of advocacy space or find spaces where you can have more in-depth conversations about what's going on, make sure you're getting connected with your state and regional consortia, organizations like APAP, Americans for the Arts, Arts Action Fund, and there's other collaborative partners out there. So make sure you're reaching out to your colleagues saying, how are you getting engaged? Where can I get engaged? Where is the need? And start taking those steps forward. We can all do personal advocacy with our own, our own representatives, but there are larger things that we can be engaged with as well. So finding your community and finding the space where you can make the most difference, I think, is key to us not feeling like we can't do anything right now. There certainly are things that we could do. Just find your community and find what means the most to you that you can do. Another thing I've been thinking about, team, is the role of government in arts funding. James and I did talk about how democracy and theater have always been twins, right? They came at the same time. They've always been intertwined. One cannot exist without the other. And I've always been a really strong believer in government funding for the arts because, again, the symbolism of our government investing not only economically in a sector, but also raising up the creative potential of its people, I think is so incredibly important. However, this moment in time and looking back in history, not only to American history, but to history around the world, looking at what has happened in Hungary with the Viktor Orban presidency, and looking at this current moment, it raises a philosophical question for me. Should a government be engaged in funding the arts? While it's important economically, it also opens the door for censorship, as we saw in the late 30s with the Federal Theater Project. I don't know what the right answer is, but it is a question that has been running around my head. And that's a system that we have built over 100 years, and it would be really hard to untangle. And I realize all of that. But do we as a sector want to still so heavily rely on government funding and continually open the door to potential censorship?
Well, let me say this. The majority of the time, while democracy and theater have been twins and aligned, theater was the only media that was speaking to the people. Newspaper was the first media outside of theater performance that was speaking to the people in a certain way. And now that we have film, television, and moved now into streaming, all of those media are a way for issues to be taken to the people that are outside of traditional theater. And so the role that theater played in the beginning, aligning with democracy, is now played by all media as far as speaking to the people and how that is utilized. And so theater is no longer the only twin to democracy that aligns us with educating and influencing the public. So the question is, in a capitalist society that we're in right now, non-governmental funding through ticket sales or donors is given directly to things that they either align with mentally or is a high return on investment. The high return on investment are much more commercial things that aren't necessarily speaking to a political movement or a societal movement. So where does the funding come from for things that are challenging us and changing us from a social and idealistic standpoint? And what is the value of government funding for things like that?
Katie, you bring up some good points about different times in history that arts and culture have been weaponized to use as, for one extreme or another, or as propaganda. But I think it just harkens back to why the bipartisan support is so valuable, is that it's there to tell both stories. And when done, quote unquote, right, it does allow us to create more art, share more art with the world, and, sort of like challenge some of the social norms, and really be able to export some of that, throughout the world and throughout the US. And so there is some challenges on that like this is much like everything is a really good idea on paper, but then you put humans behind it and you put like their ideology or their self-serving side like comes out, and it all of a sudden skews it into something else, and I will say that oftentimes like that is done with the best of intentions. Like I do believe that for the most part, people are acting as to what they think is their version of right. But what's that saying? The road to hell is paved with good intentions.
This system only works when politicians are actually working in the best interest of the people that they represent. When political norms are respected, when guardrails are held in place, when we have checks and balances in our federal government. And those things have been blown to smithereens, seemingly. Now, I think there is pushback that you're seeing through the court system and through individuals sitting in government agencies that are pushing back, that are saying no. But up until this point, the Kennedy Center was put into place in 1965. That has always been respected, right? There's nothing that says, that's written in the bylaws, that the president can't be the chairperson. But the president to this point has always respected the tradition and sort of the political norm of that being held by a non-political individual. When that is no longer the case, we have to ask the question of like, if it's so easily dismissed, what do we need to do to protect it in the future? Because there is no actual law protecting the Kennedy Center from this happening. Should there have been? Maybe, but we didn't think we needed it. Do we need it now?
I don't know that we need it now. I think we needed it 3 months ago. And it doesn't even have to be law as much as it would have just had to have been the bylaws of the board and the organization. Whenever it comes to our own organizations, analyzing what it looks like for our organizations and what needs to be put into our bylaws to protect ourselves, to protect our organizations, and to protect our missions within the bylaws of the board or the organizations themselves.
That's a good point. I mean, that actually is a larger conversation there, is just talking about, how does an organization continue past its current moment and its current staff or, leaders, to sort of protect what is most valuable to those institutions. Obviously, this is at a much higher level, but, it's still at its core the same thing.
I do also want to say that we know how difficult this moment is for our colleagues at the NEA and the Kennedy Center. And you have our complete sympathy and empathy. We know that you are in the toughest position of all because you are dealing with this moment to moment, day to day. And we out here in the wider arts world, we have your backs, and we know that this is not an easy moment for you.
Now that we have solved all the problems with the NEA and the Kennedy Center, feel free to write us if we need to get, consulting fees for both those organizations. We can right that ship. Everything's good. You've listened to this podcast, so we're all good to go now. But the reality is like, this is a very complex topic. When you're talking about both organizations and what is happening in this current time. And I think that, it is valuable for us to recognize that this is really three people's opinions and three people's thoughts on this. We're in the industry. We take a lot of time reading about this for both our own education and the benefit of our organizations. But there's a lot of nuance to this. And I guarantee that there's many of you listening right now that are saying things like, oh, you didn't talk about this, or you should have said this. So I would say to that, reach out to us. Drop us a message on social media, send us an email. We want to hear those opinions. And, if we have an opportunity, we will share that with other listeners as well. So please do that. But I do think that this really just drives home the point that, like we always talk about, this is a community. Relationships are important. Get involved. Try to stay up on top of things. Talk to, like Katie said, your national organizations, your state organizations, and sometimes your lobbying organizations for the arts and cultures in your state as well. Because this is how we enact change. We can't always do it through our organizations, but we can do it on a personal level. So if this is valuable to you, look at the 5 Calls app and find out who your legislators are and make a phone call to them. Like, you're not in a position where you have zero voice. So now is the time to use that and to continue to focus on your mission and your vision and to keep fighting the good fight. Like, do what you believe is right and continue to do that. So with that, we'll see you next week.
All right, everyone. Thanks for listening to There's No Business Like. Our producers and hosts are Brian Zelmer, Josh Benson, Kevin Maynard, Katie Miller, and me, Danielle Van Hook. Views expressed in this podcast are ours alone and are not reflective of the organizations we are a part of. Keep up with us at nobusinesslike.com. There you'll find links to all of our episodes and socials. If you like this podcast, give us a like, a follow, a review, or our favorite, a 5-star rating. Oh, wait, what was that site? I got it, don't worry. It is nobusinesslike.com. Do I sound out bus-I-ness every time I type it? Yep, sure do. Stay in touch, my friends.
Welcome back to There's No Business Like. I'm here with my friends, Katie.
Hi, everyone. Katie Miller with Michigan Maven Creative Associates.
Was that pause because you weren't sure if we were your friends? Is that?
Yeah.
You're like,
I was like, yeah, is that factual?
Okay.
Brian.
Brian from Bardavon Presents.
Danielle.
Danielle Van Hook from the Alton and McLean, Virginia. Nailed it.
Exploitative of the donkeys. Like, they're not trained for this. They're not used to having people ride on them. Like, I don't know. It just, since I learned about it, it just feels weird.
So if it was horse basketball, you'd be all about it?
I'm still not really okay with that either, but at least they're like trained.
The comedy of it comes from the donkeys not listening and being stubborn.
I know. It just seems weird.
And I mean, riding donkeys goes biblical.
I know, but are these donkeys trained for that?
These donkeys weren't in the Bible. If that's what you're asking.